And what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another Angle of Pursuit podcast, your fantasy football home over at fakepigskin.com. I'm your host, Kyle Robert. You can follow me on Twitter at NotoriousKRO. With me tonight, it's Damian Dabrowski. What's up, Damian?
Week 2 in the books, coming up on the biggest week of the preseason, and all anybody's talking about is the NBA. So, business as usual, right?
Gotta love the offseason. That Kyrie for Isaiah Thomas, man, that had me like definitely dumbfounded. But I think it's a trade that makes a ton of sense for both teams.
Yeah. I mean, it was weird that they'd give up. They're willing to give up that pick for Kyrie, but they wouldn't, and Isaiah, but they wouldn't give up the pick for Jimmy Butler. But hey.
Yeah, it's definitely it's hard to read Ainge, but it was nice to see him actually pull off a trade. Damien, we have a guest tonight. You hear him on the FNTSY Sports Network, FNTSY Sports Radio. You read his work at Roto Experts. It's Frank Stampfl. What's up, Frank?
Not much, guys. Thanks for having me on. And I just want to clear this up before we get started. You had Matt Harmon on last episode, right?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I just want to preface this whole episode by saying that I'm a huge downgrade from Matt Harmon. So thanks for having me follow up.
What's your broccoli situation though?
Brussels sprouts.
Or that's what it was, Brussels sprouts.
Yeah,
it was one of those things.
Yeah. Do you have any hot takes on vegetables?
I'm actually known as the guy in the office, the FNTSY Sports Network, that eats no vegetables. Like, they all make fun of me that all I eat is carbs, pasta, bread, sandwiches, and I'm like, this is a great life. Like, why are you guys making fun of me? Like, I don't eat vegetables, and I'm still fairly fit. So, like, what's the problem?
Dude, no joke. I'm literally the exact same thing. Like, I haven't eaten a vegetable in like 7 years. And people give me shit for it. And I'm like, dude, like, I'm so much happier than you. Like, I see you eating your salad every day, just miserable. Like, lunch is like the best part of my day. Like, are you kidding me? You only live once. So I'm gonna eat what I want to eat.
Well, you guys
exactly
enjoy.
The same.
You guys enjoy your carbs. I'll be over here crying into my salad. But we'll move along. Hey, Frank, we're just here to fool everybody. If we can do that, then we'll be good. Guys, I want to talk about Odell Beckham off the top. Obviously, we kind of referenced it on the Monday show, but there's talks that it might be a little more severe. He might miss a week. He might miss 2 weeks. Frank, at what point do you downgrade Odell in your rankings? Do you start considering maybe some of the second tier running backs or AJ Green, Michael Thomas, Mike Evans type receivers over Odell? Is it one game? Is it 2 games?
Yeah, for the most part, I'm not downgrading him. And I know this might sound crazy, but I've had Mike Evans ranked over Odell Beckham for the entirety of the offseason. I think if you're gonna lower Mike Evans based on Deshaun Jackson being there, them drafting OJ Howard, I mean, you could say the same exact thing for Odell Beckham, right? I mean,
yeah.
They got Brandon Marshall, they drafted Evan Engram. So I think there are a lot of parallels there. I mean, the Giants will probably pass the ball more than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So you can make that argument, but I've had Mike Evans ranked over him the entire offseason, and I'm going to stick with that. I'm still going to take him. If I'm in a PPR league, I'm going Mike Evans at number 4 overall. For now, I mean, I'm not dropping Odell Beckham far. I mean, if someone else wants to take an AJ Green, Julio Jones over him in the first round, some of those running backs, I'm not going to knock it. But on a per-game basis, we know how good Odell Beckham is going to be. It does worry me a little bit that he has notoriously been a slow starter each of the past 2 seasons. So if he's not playing the first 1 or 2 games, and then he has to come back and he is a slow starter, I mean, we could be getting into the second month of the season where you're not getting elite production out of Odell Beckham. So it is a little worrisome. But overall, I kind of think that this whole take on him, all these articles coming out, I view it as clickbait. I think that they're trying to make something out of nothing here. I mean, the hit looked terrible. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
And it could end up being more severe than they're leading on right now. But ultimately, I think it's something that they're just trying to get more attention out of than they should. Hopefully, he's ready for week 1. I mean, if he misses week 1 or 2 weeks, you could take one of those elite guys, like I said, over him. He shouldn't drop further than 8, 9, 10. I firmly believe that in any draft, PPR, half PPR, or standard. I'm just not letting him fall that far.
Damien, what about you? Obviously right now it's still up in the air. So, if you're drafting this weekend, are you drafting AJ Green, Mike Evans, Jordan Howard, any of those kind of players over him?
I mean, I said this on Twitter when it happened. I don't know if the Giants are using like Ray Ramirez and the Mets training staff, but I have no idea how you hurt your ankle on that play. Like that was not part of the play. But listen, if we're going off of that, I'm kind of with Frank here. I'm not going to overreact to injury news in week 2 of the preseason just because I don't think teams really have much incentive to be that accurate with it right now. It's not like it's a Wednesday, injury report 2 days, 3 days before the game. So much can change in 3 weeks that he could in a week we could hear that he's totally fine. So I'm not moving him. I think, like I said, Evans and Green are the only two players that I think I could understand if somebody, in Frank's case, had Evans already ahead of him. I'm not there yet, but I can see those two players being close to him where if you're worried about this, you can, make that switch. But there's no way I'm moving up any of those second-tier running backs ahead of him.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement with you guys. Yeah, I think he stays in my probably third receiver, fourth or the fifth player off the board. I'm comfortable with that. Frank, let me ask you. We've been kind of going through the numbers, watching the preseason. Is there a player that you've started the kind of off season low on, and now you're starting to come around, is starting to climb up your rankings, becoming a guy that maybe you were out on, now that you're more in on his price, or a guy that you were kind of on the fence about that you're going to be gung ho about heading into drafts? Is there somebody that's rising for you?
So we actually spoke about this exact thing today on our show, the Fantasy Football Best Friends Forever. And is it fair to say the entire Rams offense minus not Todd Gurley, Sammy Watkins, because he is the new guy there? I mean, Todd Gurley is moving up my rankings a little bit. I almost want to move him ahead of Jordan Howard, but I haven't gotten there yet. But just honestly, we need not Cooper Kupp. We need Jared Goff to just be competent. If he's a competent quarterback, then I firmly believe Todd Gurley, he averaged 3.2 yards per carry last year. If he gets up to the 3.9, 4 yards per carry range, based on his workload alone, he's going to rush for near 1,100 yards, probably more than that. He's going to catch the ball out of the backfield. They brought Lance Dunbar over to be that guy. He's already hurt. So I don't see that any running back taking away from him in that part of the game as well. So I think the addition of Sean McVay, his offense is light years ahead, anything better than Jeff Fisher was last year. I mean, that boring old man offense. We get McVay in there. He's going to do wonders for this offense. So I'm moving Todd Gurley up. I feel safe taking him in the middle to late second round now, whereas before, if I had to use an early third round pick on him, I didn't feel great about it. Now I feel much better about it. Just what we've seen out of Jared Goff and this offense overall, I feel safer taking a guy like Todd Gurley. And to play off that, Cooper Kupp. I mean, I know everyone's talking of Cooper Kupp. A lot of people are going to say, oh, he was my sleeper first. I was the first guy talking about him. I'll admittedly say, when I first started ranking players, I had him outside my top 70 at wide receiver. I didn't know much about him. Went back and watched some of his college tape. I know he didn't play against the best competition in college, but this kid is legit. I mean, he's well over 6 feet tall. He's going to be the safety blanket for Jared Goff in this offense, and he's playing that role that Jamison Crowder had last year in that Washington Redskins offense that McVay was part of just 1 year ago. So I think that he's going to be that safety blanket. He could do a lot of his work in the middle of the field, short intermediate routes for Jared Goff. He can work in the red zone. We've seen already he scored a wide open touchdown last week in the preseason. So I think the entire Rams offense minus Sammy Watkins, I've dropped Sammy Watkins way down my board just because he doesn't have any familiarity with the offense right now, doesn't have a rapport with Jared Goff. At some point this season, he could be very relevant. Maybe he's a buy low by mid-season because he gets off to a really slow start. But overall, I'm raising all of the Rams weapons minus Sammy Watkins right now.
Yeah, I love that call. I mean, I'm kind of a Jared Goff guy. He was my favorite quarterback in last year's class. I think there's stuff to like there. Obviously, having Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, Sammy Watkins, Gerald Everett, he's got a bunch of weapons that you can get excited about. And, I'm 100% with you on Gurley. I think that's a guy that I feel more comfortable about. I feel like they won't be able to load the box quite as much. And Cooper Kupp's a guy that I love taking at the end of my drafts. Obviously, we saw his, Goff likes to target those short and intermediate routes. That's where Cooper Kupp lives. Obviously has skills to go deep if he needs to, but that's kind of where he's going to be, excel. And your point on Jamison Crowder, I think that's a really good one. And a guy that, if he becomes this year's Jamison Crowder, I don't know that it would shock me. Damien, what about you? Is there a guy that you've come around on, a guy that you're more excited about now that, we're really approaching the season?
Well, before I even get into my guy, I think it's interesting you guys bring up the scheme for the Rams and the coaching changes, because I know we're all into Hard Knocks and that's kind of the big show everyone talks about, but there was actually, I don't want to call it a spin-off, but basically an Amazon version of Hard Knocks on the Rams. And I didn't watch all of it, but I saw a couple scenes and I've heard it mentioned a few times where they would show clips from some of the offensive team meetings the Rams were having. And I mean, their coaches, whoever was the offensive coordinator last year, they looked less prepared than a low-level high school coach. So I guess when you throw that into context, I think it can't be that surprising that it seemed like that entire unit was basically stuck in quicksand. And it's not that they don't have talented players, because we've seen some of the things these guys have done, prior to Jeff Fisher, or whether it was in college for some of them. But we know they have the physical talent. It's just a question of putting them in the right situation to succeed. And I think McVay's going to do that. So I certainly think there's a few guys. You touched on most of them, but as a whole, I just think that offense could be significantly better than what we're expecting, just based on what we saw last year. As for my guys, there's not too many that I'm shooting up, but there are a couple that I've had to drop. I think a big one is John Brown,
Yeah.
with the Cardinals there. I mean, it's the injury situation. It's tough because it's the sickle cell. It's not obviously something that he has any control over. But basically, with kind of the way that receiver core got shifted around, a few weeks ago, it seemed like he was basically the clear-cut number two. I mean, Fitzgerald doesn't really seem to run anything outside of 70-yard routes anymore. So he would have basically all of the intermediate and deeper routes to himself. We saw him put up that big season. I don't know if I believe it was second year. And people were comparing this guy to Marvin Harrison. I know he had the connection there kind of because of Bruce Arians having been with Harrison in Indianapolis, and even when they had Tom Moore there. So obviously those guys might have been a little bit biased in terms of that's who they were going to jump to when looking for comparables. But I mean, he's a guy with great measurables. Obviously came from a lower level, but dominated there. But now, I mean, you look at what Bruce Arians is saying. It's like he's not even going to make the team,
Mm-hmm.
which I can't see that happening. But if the guy can't get on the field, if he can't play, then you can't be taking him in the 9th, 10th round anymore, hoping that he gets you 1,100 yards. So I just think it's too much risk there. There's too many players that still have potential to pop in that area of the draft that you have to slide down a little bit. And on the running back side, it's Mike Gillislee, and I know that's kind of a popular answer right now, but I think again, a few weeks ago before the preseason started, the kind of the lazy, I don't want to call it lazy, I could see why it was made, but it's basically, okay, this is LeGarrette Blount, but he's actually better. Okay, he's faster. He's a better running back. He's going to, LeGarrette Blount had 18 touchdowns last year. So what are you saying, Gillislee's going to get 22 now? Like, we got to factor in the regression that's going to happen with that offense with the additional weapons. If Gronk stays healthy, they have Dwayne Allen, they have Brandon Cooks. It's not going to be the same offense, but the other thing is they have, I mean, Rex Burkhead, right? When it happened, everybody was like, oh, Rex Burkhead. I mean, the guy has like 60 career carries. Not going to get excited over this signing, but that's what the Patriots do. They very rarely, I can't remember really since the days of, Corey Dillon, where they had one guy that they wanted to give the ball to 22 times. And there's so much overlap of skill set between most of those guys really outside of Gillislee that, like I said, with John Brown, the injury, if you're injured and you can't play, Bill Belichick, he's not going to hold your spot for you. He's going to find somebody that can do it, whether it's your fault or not. And that's not saying, Gillislee's not going to have his moments this year, but I think, seeing him go in the 4th and 5th round earlier, it was crazy, because now there's a chance that, he's not going to even lead that backfield in touches.
Yeah. I love both those names. Damien, are you drafting John Brown at all?
If I can get him late, I'm still in on him, just because I don't think there's really anybody there that's going to take his spot, and it's just a question of if he can get on the field enough to kind of have an impact. So if I can get him round 11, round 12, I'm still willing to take that shot, but it's got to be a double-digit round at this point.
Yeah, I had my home league draft over the weekend. I want to say he went like 12th or 13th round, and I'm kind of with you. I think at that point, depending on how your receiving core is shaking out, he's probably a guy that I'd be comfortable taking. Frank, are you in on John Brown, or is he kind of on your do not draft list?
Well, I was a couple of weeks ago, but once all this news came out, I got to agree with you guys. I'm actually finishing up a best ball draft on NFFC right now. I took him in the 10th round about 2 weeks ago. That I was pretty high on him. I didn't know how he was slipping that far, but now we're getting all this news about the sickle cell. He might not be able to play, back-to-back weeks because he needs so much more time to recuperate his body. I mean, it's not his fault, and it's not a knock on him because I think he's a very talented player. But just knowing everything we know right now, I dropped him outside my top 50 at wide receiver. I mean, a guy I just mentioned, Cooper Kupp, I'd rather take a shot on him. I'd rather take a shot on Zay Jones right now over him. Yeah, just based on all of these injury concerns that we have with John Brown.
Yeah, and Carson Palmer was a guy I was kind of talking myself into if I really waited on a quarterback, and John Brown being out definitely knocks that offense a little bit. Obviously, David Johnson will be fine, Larry Fitzgerald will be fine, but outside of that, I don't know if there's much to like. I have a couple guys I want to throw out in terms of guys that are rising for me. The first one is Devontae Parker. I think the addition of Jay Cutler really makes a difference for this offense. Obviously, Jay Cutler's already saying, oh, Parker's a faster Alshon Jeffrey. We know Cutler can get, kind of have a laser focus and pick one guy that he wants to pelt with targets. So I think Devontae Parker is a guy that I'm coming around on. And the other one is Kelvin Benjamin. He was kind of a guy that he was going in like 6th, 7th round. Now he's up to the 5th. I'm fine taking him there. A couple weeks ago, I probably wasn't, but he's looking good. Cam's obviously looking good. He's going to play in the preseason game this weekend, so that's good news. So yeah, those two receivers are two guys that I'm very much looking up at. All right, Damien, we got to thank our first sponsor, and that is Draft. Fantasy football fans, listen up. If you love fantasy football, and Frank was just talking about best ball leagues, they're my new favorite, strategy. And with the app Draft, you can do best ball leagues all the time. There's fast 30-second clocks that you can jump in, do a draft, and be out in no time at all. There's slower moving ones, so if you want to kind of plan out your draft a little bit, but you get to basically draft a full team, 18 roster spots. You don't have to worry about waiver wire. You don't have to worry about trades. You don't have to worry about injuries. The app will put the best players in for you. Make sure you go to playdraft.com/fakepigskin, or if you download the app, there's a spot for a promo code. Use fakepigskin. Deposit $5. You not only get an extra $3 ticket to a draft, but you also get Fake Pigskin Elite for the entire season. So go check that out if you live in an area. They'll have DFS all year long. So if you live in an area where DFS isn't allowed, Arizona, you won't be able to do that. But for the most of you should be able to take part in it. Draft's awesome, and that code goes through September 7th. So if you're thinking about doing it, make sure you make a point of doing it now. So guys, let's jump in. Let's talk some AFC West, and we'll start with the Denver Broncos. Frank, it looks like Trevor Siemian, at least for now, will be the starter for the Denver Broncos. If you're looking, to target weapons in this offense, does that make you more comfortable or less comfortable targeting those guys?
Yeah, it makes me more comfortable just because of the familiarity factor that he has with these weapons already. I know Demaryius Thomas didn't have a great season last year. You could say the same for Emmanuel Sanders. They were solid. They were solid wide receivers. Probably not what you expected, especially out of Demaryius Thomas. But, another year around those weapons, I think the fact that Mike McCoy is calling plays for this team once again, that, maybe he can get the most out of Trevor Siemian. But, I think really it's a knock on Paxton Lynch, the fact that he's come here in his second season and hasn't made any progress. I think it's the right decision that they went with Trevor Siemian over Paxton Lynch. I'm not surprised at all. I think we just need Trevor Siemian to be an average quarterback. Like, he doesn't have to blow anybody away. I think they have enough talent on the outside there where, just kind of get it in the vicinity of those receivers and, let them do what they do and make players miss after they catch the ball. But overall, I'm happy with Trevor Siemian as the starting quarterback there because I think, if Paxton Lynch is there, we've heard questions about his accuracy. I know that he was a quarterback who liked to run the ball a lot in college. So perhaps, more so than looking down the field, if he got out the pocket, he would try to run a little bit more. Trevor Siemian's more of that traditional quarterback, going to stay in the pocket and throw the ball. Offensive line should be a little bit better this year too. So I think it's shaping up to be a better season overall for the Broncos pass catchers. I'm personally taking Demaryius Thomas in the 3rd round of my drafts, regardless of its PPR or standard. I mean, this is a guy 5 straight years with at least 90 receptions and 1,000 yards. I know people don't like touchdown totals from 1 year ago. I mean, the past 2 years, the touchdown totals haven't been great. But the last time he worked with Mike McCoy was actually his breakout season, where he went for something like over 1,400 yards and double-digit touchdowns. He had Peyton Manning as his quarterback, but if Mike McCoy can find ways to get Demaryius Thomas more involved this season, I mean, we see the targets come up a little bit, especially in the red zone. Everyone's talking about this report that came out with end zone targets from 1 year ago, where I think it was Emmanuel Sanders doubled that of Demaryius Thomas. I mean, if that evens out a little bit, or if Demaryius Thomas, we see an uptick in red zone targets again, then I think we could see more touchdowns. So right now, I'm kind of buying last year's trash into Demaryius Thomas in the 3rd round. People can argue that Emmanuel Sanders is a better value in the 5th or 6th round. I'm not going to say no, because they had nearly equivalent receiving lines 1 year ago. But I'll take a shot on both guys. And I do have Demaryius Thomas in multiple places already, whether it's a standard or a PPR league. So I still trust him as a high-end wide receiver 2. Probably don't want him as your wide receiver 1. But I think he does offer a pretty safe floor in that range, that 12 to 15 wide receiver range.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. I love Trevor Siemian being the quarterback. I think Paxton Lynch is terrible. Like, I don't think he's an NFL quarterback, and I think he's proving that on the field. It is nice to see Siemian under center. I'm with you on Demaryius. I'm with you on Sanders. I think there's a lot to like. Obviously, like, I'm looking at Sanders on Fantasy Football Calculator right now in PPR leagues. He's going basically the last pick of the 6th round. Like, give me that value all day long. Touchdowns are fluky. I know we've seen kind of a progression for Demaryius, but I think with McCoy back, I think, you're on something. I think he's going to end up, giving him more red zone targets, kind of organizing the offense to look his way a little bit more when they get in close. And I'm absolutely fine taking Demaryius in the 3rd and, Sanders in the 6th, especially in PPR. Damien, what about you? Are you in on Demaryius or Sanders or both?
Yeah, I can see why people are kind of reluctant to get excited about Siemian, because there really isn't much upside here. But at the same time, I do think the floor is underrated because he, in that kind of stereotypical game manager, I guess, term, if you will, for him, it's the fact that he's gonna move this offense. He might not be the most efficient guy in the red zone. He might not give you a lot of big plays, but he's also not going to make a ton of mistakes. And the nice thing with a quarterback like that too is, especially in this case, he's not a guy that's going to be going through 4 or 5 progressions on a play. He's just going to get the ball out to his best players, and it's, in this case, it's obviously Demaryius and Emmanuel Sanders. And it's, when you have that narrow of a distribution tree for an offense, it might not be the greatest thing in reality from a NFL perspective, but for fantasy, it's terrific because you know where the ball's going on every play. It's kind of what we saw with the Jets when they had Brandon Marshall and Eric Decker, and it was 8 catches for 95 yards and a touchdown every single week. They didn't necessarily win a ton of games, but they scored a ton of fantasy points, and I think that's what we're going to see here. You know what you're getting. It's not going to be 1,500 yards and 12 touchdowns. But I really see it hard for either of these guys to really disappoint you. I think the floor is high enough where, like Frank said, they're both pretty good values.
Yeah, and they're perfect guys to pair with a little more volatility if you want to, gamble on somebody later, or if you take a guy maybe like Keenan Allen, pair him with Emmanuel Sanders, then you have that safety and reliability, but you also have that upside. So yeah, I think they're both guys that I love where they're going and will be targeting a lot. Let's talk about the running game. I'm obviously a big C.J. Anderson guy. We really haven't seen him play a full season. Most of his, success has come in 8-9 game type chunks. Frank, are you a C.J. Anderson guy? And if not, I mean, are you in on Jamal Charles, D'Angelo Henderson, or just kind of out on the running game as a whole?
Yeah, I'm not really in on CJ Anderson. I mean, I can understand why people would want to take a shot on him in the 5th, 6th round. I've seen him go in some drafts in the 4th round, and I can't really get behind that. I can't make an argument for that at all. But in the 5th, 6th round, I mean, right now he is the starting running back for his team, which, we just spoke about the weapons that they have on the outside. If they get down the field more often this year, another season with Trevor Siemian at the helm, that familiarity I talked about, if they have more success getting down the field, he might have more scoring opportunities as well. I know just 1 year ago He only played 7 games. The offensive line was not great. But overall, I mean, he's been a pretty talented running back throughout his career. 4.6 yards per carry. That's nothing to sneeze at. Personally, I think he's just a guy like you just don't feel sexy taking that pick. I guess it's not like a super high upside pick
Yeah.
where he's going. But you could say that about all the running backs in his range. I mean, in that RB 20 to 30 range this year, I mean, it's absolutely gross. I mean, take a shot, throw something against the wall, and see what sticks with one of these guys. I mean, we're talking about LeGarrette Blount now is getting pushed down boards. He was in that range. I mean,
Yeah.
Paul Perkins was in that range. Bilal Powell is in a timeshare with Matt Forte, we think. I mean, there's just a ton of. I mean, we spoke about Mike Gillislee earlier on. He's going in that range too. So, I mean, at least with CJ Anderson, you know that to start, he's probably going to be the guy, and he's probably a pretty safe bet for 15 plus touches per game. If I had to take a shot on somebody else, I like Devontae Booker. I mean, they have some draft capital in him. They used a decent draft pick on him. He was a pretty good running back at Utah. He wasn't amazing. He didn't put up monster numbers like some of these guys we see coming out, like the Melvin Gordons and stuff like that. But they have some draft capital invested in a Devontae Booker. So, if something happens to C.J. Anderson, because we've seen him banged up the past 2 seasons, I think Devontae Booker will probably be the next man up once he returns, because I know he's still, rehabbing from that injury. He might return around week 2, week 3, hopefully earlier than that, but we'll see what happens with him. And then I guess D'Angelo Henderson is the next one up. There's a guy who's running very well in the preseason right now, been impressing all the coaches. Everything we've heard out of Broncos camp right now is that, they like this kid. The problem is he's only 5'7". I'm not sure that he can ever be a running back that's going to shoulder the load for this team. I mean, if something were to happen to C.J. Anderson, it's probably going to turn into a committee between a bunch of guys. But if I had to take one of them besides Anderson, it would be Devontae Booker. Jamal Charles, I don't even know if he makes his team. I think he's going to play this weekend. I think that's something that they revealed. But he's certainly not a lock. And I would probably say that D'Angelo Henderson, based on his preseason, has probably even moved ahead of Jamal Charles. It wasn't a bad signing for them. It was like a low-risk kind of high-reward if it panned out. But he's probably not going to make the team. I don't love C.J. Anderson, but for where he's going, he's a starting running back. If you take him as your RB2, if you start with 3 wide receivers, it's not a problem. I'm never going to feel sexy, I guess, taking that pick.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Like I typically start receiver heavy in most of my drafts, so he's definitely a guy that is in the range of guys where I'm gonna grab 4 or 5 running backs, and he's probably gonna be one of the guys I'm targeting. And he's a starter. I think Booker is interesting. Obviously, Henderson I think could get work even if it's as a 3rd down back. I'm with you that if Anderson does go down, it's probably some combination of whoever's happens to still be there. Like I think Jamal's gone, but yeah, I can see Booker, Henderson kind of being your running back in Denver. But I mean, we saw this guy become somebody 2 years ago that fantasy owners loved, and 2015 they're drafting in the 1st round, and obviously he disappointed there and was injured last year, but I still think there's a lot to like. Offensive line has to play better for him to be a real thing, but where he's going, middle of the 5th, I'm very fine with that. Damien, what about you?
I'm a little biased just because my big home league switched to a dynasty, I want to say 3 years ago, and it was following the year basically C.J. Anderson had like the greatest second half we've ever seen from a running back. So I took him in the 2nd round. Thought I locked up the championship. Haven't made the playoffs since. So between him and Jeremy Hill in the 3rd round.
Oh yeah, that's my fake pigskin dynasty league right there.
Yeah, well,
and you can see it. You see how well my team's doing.
Thought I had the backfield locked up for the next 10 years. Lo and behold, 3 years later. So he's just been radioactive to me ever since. Between the injury history and the fact that there always seems to be some type of intriguing option floating around behind him, that we never really see the full commitment to him, and whenever he does kind of pull out 2-3 good games in a row, he gets nicked up, and he's out the next week. So I might be like the only person that's kind of in on Jamal Charles right now. Not from anything I've seen, because we certainly haven't seen anything to be like that. But I just think it's kind of weird that for the past couple of seasons, this guy was basically a bona fide first round pick, and then he got hurt, and then he got hurt again, and obviously, at that age, it certainly wouldn't be strange to see his kind of career end on account of those injuries. But at the same time, we haven't really ever seen him be bad as a result of those injuries. Since they happened, we just haven't seen him really get on the field. So if somehow they're behind him and he's 100%, it wouldn't shock me if we see 80% of the Jamal Charles we were used to seeing in KC, and given how good he was there, even 80% of him I think would be a relevant fantasy option here. And he, even with kind of the production he had, he's not a guy that was ever getting 30 touches a game. So I don't think he really has the workload of kind of your traditional 30-year-old running back. So not saying go out and reach for him or anything, but it wouldn't shock me if this isn't the end of the Jamal Charles story.
Yeah, I mean, I do worry about his knees, like being like connected to his body, but other than that, like if he if he can actually be like somewhat healthy, obviously he'll be a nice weapon. I just like, are you drafting him in the 10th, 11th round where he's currently going?
No, I'm not doing anything like that. I think it would probably have to be like 15 or 16, and honestly, it would probably be in in a $10 best ball. I wouldn't really want to tie myself to him. In a higher stakes league where I kind of have to make weekly decisions about him.
Yeah. 100% with you there. Let's head over to LA, the former San Diego Chargers. And Damian, let's talk about Phillip Rivers. I love to wait on quarterback, and Rivers is definitely interesting to me there. If you're patient, you're waiting on quarterback, he's obviously coming off the board, 10th round, QB 13. Is he a guy that's kind of in your queue of guys to target as the draft rolls along?
I can't make like a logical stat-based case against him, but it's still hard for me to kind of separate what I see when I watch Phillip Rivers play against kind of the numbers that he puts up. The fact that he always looks like he's about to cry. He always looks like the throw's going to be 15 yards short. He's just shot putting it out there. You're waiting for it to get picked off, and sometimes it does, but more often than not, it usually gets there. So I've just never been really able to reconcile that to a point where I've kind of, it's the sexy thing that Frank was talking about. I was just like, I don't want my quarterback to throw the ball like Phillip Rivers throws the ball. So I mean, like I said, I can't make a case against him. I probably won't own him, but I think if you're trying to be kind of rational and objective about this, then he's a guy that's been productive his entire career. There's the thing is though, there's a lot of interesting options there, but there's also a lot of questions between not knowing if Antonio Gates really has anything left in the tank right now. What's going to happen with Mike Williams and the back injury? Keenan Allen, gets hurt every single season, it feels like. So aside from Melvin Gordon and Tyrell Williams, I think if we end up in a situation where they're trotting out, I think the Chargers have been one of those teams that over the past couple of seasons, they've been trotting out some. We make fun of this with the Giants in baseball, Kyle, but they've been trotting out some guys at receiver that I was certain they just plucked out of like NCAA 12. They didn't even have photos. They just had the generic faces, and it was like Sammy Abuji Bobby from some Division II school. So I just like it. If that happens again, it's going to be hard for him to keep up that production.
Yeah, and that's a very fair point. Obviously, with the current roster, and if Keenan Allen is out there, Gates and Hunter Henry and Tyrell Williams, and if we get Mike Williams late in October, and Melvin Gordon obviously broke out last year, like there's a lot to like. But you bring up a good point where Mike Williams just doesn't see the field. He's kind of Josh Doxson, and Keenan Allen gets hurt like Keenan Allen typically does, and maybe Melvin Gordon takes a little bit of a step back in terms of his production, and all of a sudden you're looking at a quarterback that's that's fine, but he's a lot closer to Trevor Siemian than a guy you want to be playing each and every week, and that's not a place you want to be. So, I guess you have to go in kind of with that understanding that you may have to stream, and that could be a real result. Frank, what about you? Are you in on Phillip Rivers?
Originally, when I first started making my rankings, I had him as a top 10 quarterback. Now I've dropped him down to 13, and I'll get into why in a second. But I do want to touch on what you mentioned about like players that have just shown up and have no idea who they are. I'll never forget this. One year, it was probably like 5 years ago, they had the wide receiver Seyi Ajarotutu.
That's what I was thinking of when I said Sammy Ajay-Jabajayka. That's what I was thinking of.
And that's exactly what you reminded me of, because I'll never forget this. Someone picked him up on a Sunday morning and started him against me, and he scored like 2 touchdowns and had like something like over 20 fantasy points. So I'll never forget the name Seyi Azuro Tutu. That is definitely true what you mentioned, and it's unfortunate over the past couple of years for Phillip Rivers. I mean, his top weapon is going down. We've seen just a year ago, Keenan Allen down for the entire year. I know we'll touch on Keenan Allen too, but injuries have been very fluky with him. But Phillip Rivers is such a gunslinger. He turns the ball over a little bit, likes to force things down the field. And I'm looking at his schedule early on in the season, and I know a lot of people don't like to do this because there's so much turnover on defense from one year to the next. But I mean, the Broncos in Week 1, the Chiefs in Week 3, the Giants in Week 5, the Broncos again in Week 7, and then the Patriots in Week 8. I mean, the Patriot game could end up being a shootout, but I think the Patriots have one of the best defenses in the NFL heading into this season. So we're talking about potentially 4 or 5 games in the first 8 weeks that you're not going to feel great about starting Phillip Rivers, who typically is a fast starter and then just kind of tails off in the second half of seasons. So, if we're drafting him as our quarterback one, the first half of the year, we're looking at 4 games that we don't feel confident starting him. I mean, I just am probably avoiding him as my quarterback one. Obviously, in Superflex leagues, he's being drafted. I have no problem with that.
Yeah.
But I'm not really targeting him, I guess, as my quarterback one. I mean, I'm all over Jameis Winston. I know a lot of people are. I'm going to live or die with him this season. Kirk Cousins is another guy. Mariota, Stafford, all those guys in that range, I guess you can say 7 through 12. I'd rather have all of those quarterbacks ahead of Phillip Rivers.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. Obviously, the two Denver, Denver's going to be good at defense. The Giants secondary is going to be really good. I'm with you on the Patriots. I think they're going to be good. So, now you're. It's almost like you should just let somebody else draft him, and then they'll cut him. Week 4, week 5 when they start driving him crazy. And then if you want to, pick him up for the stretch run, and get Keenan Allen still healthy, and there's a lot to like there. Well, then pick him up. Ride him. Carson Palmer has a really nice schedule to start the season. Stafford has a really nice schedule. Shoot, you could pick up Sam Bradford for week 1 against the New Orleans Saints and go from there, and then kind of target Phillip Rivers later. So, yeah, I think, you kind of nailed it there. And he's not going to be somebody that you probably want to draft, but definitely keep an eye on, see how it goes, and go from there. So, if there is a little pessimism, there is a little, the schedule that they face is daunting. Frank, where do you fall on Keenan Allen? Because obviously, when healthy, this guy has shown the ability to be, among the elite. But 2 straight seasons of devastating injuries that probably weren't really his fault. But his body gives out and down he goes. And you're paying a 3rd round, your 4th round price tag on him. Are you comfortable doing so?
Me personally, no. And actually, over the weekend, my co-host on Fantasy Football Best Friends, we split a team 3 different ways. This is the first time I've ever done this in my life, and we were pretty much going with a majority vote on our draft picks where, if 2 of the owners want him, then the other person gets outruled, and that's exactly what happened with Keenan Allen. I didn't want him. I am probably not going to own him on any of my teams this season, but the other 2 did, and we got him at 311, so that would have been pick 35 overall in that draft. In a PPR, that's fine. I mean, that's where he's going to be going. Yeah. I know that he has the top 10 upside in that format, especially PPR. Don't like him as much in standard because I feel like the tight ends are still going to be so heavily involved in the red zone that it's probably going to take away from his touchdown scoring ability. But the PPR upside is definitely there. The past 2 seasons, torn ACL, lacerated kidney the year before, these are very fluky injuries. It's not something like an Alshon Jeffrey situation where it's soft tissue injuries, hamstrings, like quads. It's nothing to do with his muscles. It's been fluke injuries. I mean, we've seen torn ACL happen to anybody. Jordy Nelson most recently, and last year we were still drafting him at the swing, maybe even in the 2nd round, and he paid off huge dividends. So, I mean, we could probably get production not as good as Jordy Nelson last year, but we can get top 10 wide receiver production out of Keenan Allen in the PPR format. My thing is, for a lot of people that use that argument against me, which I know it's so weird that I'm defending Keenan Allen right now, but the guys that are going in his range, Devontae Adams in a standard. We talk about Keenan Allen's upside to be a top 10 receiver. just 1 year ago, Devontae Adams was a top 10 receiver. I mean, he's already finished ninth over a 16-game span. We've seen him do it. He's in a prolific offense. So in a standard league, you ask me, I'd rather take a shot on a Devontae Adams over him. DeAndre Hopkins in a PPR, I know his QB situation is not great, but we've seen him finish as a top 5 wide receiver before, and he's arguably one of the most talented wide receivers in the league. So honestly, I can make this argument for a bunch of wide receivers in that range for Keenan Allen. That's personally why I'm not going to have him on my team. I just find a bunch of players that are safer than him in that range, that round 3, round 4 wide receiver range, that I personally would rather have over him. I can't knock somebody for wanting to take him in that range though, and try and bank on the the upside, especially in a PPR format.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm looking at Keenan Allen or Devontae Adams, I don't care what format it is. I'm taking Keenan Allen all day. I know he had 12 touchdowns. I know he had almost 1,000 yards, but the 2 previous seasons, 800 yards, 4 touchdowns. Randall Cobb, if he's healthy, Martellus Bennett's there. I don't get Devontae Adams, and he could be one of the guys that I'm just wrong about, but I that's one guy that I will just not own anywhere. Damian, Keenan Allen, is he a guy that you are targeting heading into drafts, and in third, fourth round, if he falls to you, are you comfortable taking him there?
No, I'm with Frank. I would definitely rather have Adams. I just with Allen, I think a lot of it was the kind of the earlier production we saw from him was just a product of there not really being much else going on in that offense. He wasn't. I mean, he was a very productive college player, but if you look at his metrics, he certainly doesn't look like somebody who should translate into basically a pretty prolific receiver at the next level. I think he ran like a 4.7 something 40. And I know this doesn't really mean everything. I mean, Anquan Bolden ran a 4.7 40, and that guy's going to the Hall of Fame. But it's just there's no downfield element to his game right now. It's strictly underneath. And when you factor in the injury history and the fact that there's a lot of other pieces here, I just think, Devontae Adams, I don't necessarily, again, like I'm not making the point here that he's a more talented receiver, because we saw, 2 years ago, Devontae Adams put together probably the worst season I've ever seen from a wide receiver in terms of like actual advanced metrics. But at the same time, when you have Aaron Rodgers throwing you the ball, you only need 70% of targets relative to what you need from another quarterback. We know that offense is going to be moving. We know they're going to have Jordy Nelson. They're going to have other players to cover. I don't think I ever have to worry about Devontae Adams becoming the focal point of the defense. So I'm willing to take that there. If Keenan Allen falls and we're looking at him in kind of, as receiver 20 or something, then I can see that case. But I can't really make a case for taking him inside the top 15 or so at receiver.
Yeah, well, I'll be on an island there. We'll see how this season pans out. So, Damian, obviously we saw Tyrell Williams break out last year when Keenan went down. Does Keenan Allen have to be hurt for Tyrell Williams to be productive in this offense, or do you think there's a role for him as kind of the wide receiver too, especially with where tight ends we're going to get to here in a second, but the tight ends and Melvin Gordon and all the other weapons in the offense?
Oh, I definitely think there's a role for Tyrell, because as we saw last year, he only needs 5 or 6 targets to make an impact. I mean, unlike Keenan Allen, this guy can give you, 4 for 110 and a score. So that downfield element, which I don't think really anybody else on this offense right now is giving them, and the injury questions surrounding Mike Williams, I think it's going to be a lot of Keenan Allen working underneath. You'll have the tight ends in the middle, but I think anything, 15 yards and further downfield is going to be Tyrell. And we saw the explosion he had. He may not have the best consistency in terms of having a great floor every week, but I think more often than not, he's going to make that big play and give you production.
Frank, what about you? Tyrell Williams have the potential to be a flex guy, a guy you grab late and can be an impact on your fantasy team?
Yeah, I like him in that wide receiver 35 to 40 range. I like him as a wide receiver 4, like you mentioned, kind of get him in there as a flex. I mean, he's a good complement to Keenan Allen, because if Keenan Allen is working a lot of those short to intermediate routes, he can get down the field. He's a big-bodied wide receiver too. I mean, he's 6'4", has good speed, so perhaps could even be used in the red zone. I know the tight ends are going to be used a lot there, but perhaps he has that edge over a Keenan Allen where he could score touchdowns in that part of the field. But we saw just 1 year ago, I mean, Dontrell Inman had 800 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns. Travis Benjamin had 677 yards and 4 touchdowns. So it looks like there is enough production to go around where a second wide receiver could be, fantasy viable. I agree, maybe not on a week-to-week consistency kind of standpoint, but I do like him in that range, round 8, as your fourth wide receiver or a flex, I certainly think that he can have some big games this year. We were talking about the Broncos and the Chiefs, especially in this division. They have top level corners, and if those guys are trying to slow down Keenan Allen, I mean, maybe on the opposite side of the field, he might have lesser coverage or more of an opportunity, more targets in those games specifically. So that's why I like Tyrell Williams. I don't love him, but I think he's a guy that could pop a few games this year throughout the season.
For sure. And he has that upside where if Keenan Allen does go down, especially if it's after the first few games where they play those tough defenses, now all of a sudden Tyrell Williams could be the one and getting funneled a few more targets and having even more chance at production. So, yeah, I'm 100% with you guys on Tyrell. We don't expect much from Mike Williams this year. Obviously, the back's dealing with he's still dealing with the back issues. They're saying like October, but it feels like it's going to be a slow burn. Maybe he's a guy that you add off the waiver wire towards the end, and if he can become something. But I think with Keenan, assuming Keenan's healthy and Tyrell's doing his thing, it'll be hard for him to find targets. But let's talk about the tight ends because I think there's a lot to like there. Obviously, Hunter Henry was a guy that was super productive, even though they were kind of in a position where they wanted to get Gates the record, and old man Gates is still there. Frank, are you in on Hunter Henry as kind of the tight end 11 in the 9th round, or is that a little too rich for your blood?
Yeah, admittedly, I'm probably not going to own Hunter Henry on any teams this year. I currently have him ranked as the 13th tight end. It's not a knock on him at all. I think he's going to be a very talented player, but that's going to happen once Antonio Gates retires. The two of them combined for 15 touchdowns just 1 year ago, so he's probably still going to have standalone value in a standard league. In PPR formats, there's just no way that I can target either one of these tight ends just because there's not going to be enough volume to go around. We know that Keenan Allen is going to be Phillip Rivers' favorite target. Just spoke about Tyrell Williams, still going to get a couple of targets per game. I just don't think that there's going to be enough volume there for either one of these guys to be viable in a PPR league. Standard, I get it. Hunter Henry as a low-end tight end one. But we've already seen Antonio Gates score a touchdown in the preseason. I just don't think he's going to go away. And like I said, it's not a knock on Hunter Henry. I think he's going to be very talented in this league for a long time to come. It's just that's going to happen after Antonio Gates retires. I'm still taking guys like Jack Doyle ahead of him, Delaney Walker, Martellus Bennett, just because I think those guys are going to have more consistent opportunity on a week-to-week basis.
100% with you on all those names. I like Henry. I'm with you. I think he's going to be really good, but I still think with Gates there, it's just too hard to get enough volume. I do think Henry and Gates kind of flip in terms of production, in terms of targets and stuff, but there was a lot of touchdowns from Henry last year that they tend to fluctuate from season to season, so his number will probably be 5, 6, 7, close to where it was last year, but on a lot more volume, a lot more work. You can't just assume that he's going to get more work and his numbers are just going to skyrocket. Damien, what about you? Are you in on Hunter Henry at his current price?
No, like you guys said, Gates is going to be too much of an inconvenience. I'd much rather just wait a couple extra rounds and Jack Doyle and Martellus Bennett are two guys I like that are probably going pretty close to where Henry is right now, tight end 12, tight end 13 or so. But I'd gladly take him ahead of him. So if I can get him around later, I certainly would. And then Austin Hooper's kind of the tight end guy I'm targeting a little bit later on, who I think could easily outproduce Henry straight up this season. And you factor in that discount, there's just no chance I'm going to own Henry.
Yeah, I mean, Henry's going in the 9th, Hooper's going in the 13th. I'm with you there. I'll take that value all day long. Damien, let's talk about Melvin Gordon before we head over to Kansas City. Obviously, finally broke out last year, had his big season. A lot of his value did come from those touchdowns, though. Do you expect him to kind of – is he amongst the elite for you? And, do you expect those touchdowns to kind of carry over and him to still be a big factor in the red zone?
It's a weird kind of dynamic with Gordon because the year before I think he had 0 touchdowns.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the whole thing where like how can this guy be a starting running back getting 15, 18, 20 carries a game and he can't get into the end zone, and now everybody's complaining that all he does is score like 2-yard touchdowns. So you can't have it both ways with Gordon. I think the real Melvin Gordon is probably somewhere in between. Not necessarily in terms of his talent or skill level, but just in terms of the way regression is going to work with that offense as a whole. The weird thing is when I look at the first round and I look at some of those running backs, I think that if I just had to basically look at those players in a vacuum, there was no team context, and I was just looking at who's the most talented guy, who's the most complete player. I think I'd probably have Freeman, McCoy, even maybe Jay Ajayi ahead of him. I'm not certain that Gordon is this great talent or anything. I know he had a crazy college career, but we've kind of seen that's just what Wisconsin does with the
Mm-hmm.
way they run that system. And he certainly hasn't been kind of the whole thing with with him in college is he was breaking off 60-yard runs every game, and we haven't really seen that big play ability from him in the NFL. It's really just been a lot of poor efficiency on a per play basis, but just so much volume that he was getting those numbers. And I think that's the one thing you can say about Gordon is, I mean, there's nobody else in that backfield. The fact that they weren't able to upgrade that situation whatsoever, whether it was through the draft or through signing somebody. I mean, Brandon Oliver, Kenneth Farrow. It's just if he gets hurt, I don't know what this team is going to do. So I think that gives him a little bit of a leg up on some of those other guys, because I do think that in almost any of those other scenarios, whether it's Tevin Coleman in Atlanta or whether it's even Jonathan Williams in Buffalo, we've seen Buffalo really be, the way that system works, that
Mm-hmm.
any running back that we saw with Gillisley can come in and be incredibly efficient in a limited role. So I think the fact that Gordon basically has that job completely to himself, and he's going to be essentially a lock for 22 touches a week, I think that basically moves him up. And I kind of have him as my running back for right now, very tentatively. But I think him and McCoy and Freeman are kind of the two guys that I think you can make just as strong a case. But
Yeah. I'm with you. I think in terms of volume, like the LA running backs, we mentioned Gurley a little while ago, but Gurley and Gordon should get a ton of work, and that kind of locks him into that near the elite group. Gordon is currently my RB6, so I have Freeman, Ajayi, and McCoy in front of him. But that's a tight cluster. Like if you get any of those guys, I think you'll be pretty happy. Frank, are you buying another solid year from Gordon, and is he kind of in that top 5 discussion for you?
Yeah, I also have Melvin Gordon as my running back 4, right behind LaShawn McCoy and ahead of Devontae Freeman. And it's not a knock on Freeman. I think he's probably the more talented player overall. But like Damian was saying, this is Melvin Gordon's backfield. Like, nobody is going to spell him for touches. They don't have a pass catching back that's going to, fill in for him, kind of like Danny Woodhead was 2 years ago. So I think the opportunity is going to be there. He's going to get a ton of touches. A lot of people talk about the touchdown regression, which I could understand, because 9 of his 12 touchdowns came from 3 yards or less out. 5 of those touchdowns were 1-yard touchdowns. So, I mean, he was literally right on the goal line. All he had to do was walk into the end zone. So I understand, people who are a little bit scared with the touchdown regression, but this offense is going to move the ball. I mean, this is a very good offense. Philip Rivers is going to get the ball down the field. They have Keenan Allen. These tight ends, like we just spoke about, Tyrell Williams. I mean, all the makings are there for this to be a great offense. So I think there will still be a ton of opportunities for Melvin Gordon to score touchdowns this year. I think it's probably more likely in that 8 to 10 range.
Mm-hmm.
But I like him as my RB4 this year. In a standard league, a non PPR, I have no problem taking him as high as pick 6, just because in that format, I want running backs. I want workhorse running backs where touchdowns are so valuable. And we saw, just 1 year ago that he scored 12 total touchdowns. And Anthony Lynn is now the head coach of this team, and we saw what he did with LaShawn McCoy just 1 year ago and the running backs of the Buffalo Bills. So if that's any indication, I think he's gonna try and get Melvin Gordon the ball a lot this season. I do worry about him holding up for the entirety. 16 games, we've seen 2 years in a row where his season has ended with injury. So maybe more work is not necessarily good for him, because
Yeah.
he's been a bit of injury prone towards the end of the last few years. But I think anytime that you have a running back that you can kind of just pencil in 20 touches per week, and you don't have to worry about someone taking work from him right behind him, I think that's it's a pretty safe bet in the first round, especially in non PPR leagues, like I mentioned.
Yeah. Safety early in your draft picks is always really nice. I am curious to see if he gets a little more passing down work, but I'm with you guys. I think he's back into the first, early second. I'm perfectly fine taking him there. Let's head over to Kansas City and talk about their running game. They obviously brought in Kareem Hunt. Spencer Ware is still there from last year. Ware currently going in the 5th round. Hunt's ADP is spiking a little bit to like the top of the 8th. Frank, if you're drafting one of these guys, who is it?
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, and a lot of people alike, I think this is one of the hardest situations to figure out. One of the hardest to rank right now. If I'm in a non PPR league, a standard league, probably going to take Kareem Hunt first of these two guys. And then in PPR, I'm going to take Spencer Ware because I honestly think it's going to come down to a committee here. We saw last year Spencer Ware kind of broke down in the second half of the season. The yards per carry dipped. He really fell off the map. I don't think he's built to be a workhorse running back, but he does excel in the passing game. So I think he is pretty much a lock for 40 plus receptions this year. Probably could flirt with 50 plus receptions again. But like I mentioned, I think this is probably going to be a committee approach. I Kareem Hunt could probably take over at some point. He ran well last week. They wanted to see him run with the ones in that preseason game. I saw some people were making something out of Spencer Ware only getting the first carry of the game and then getting taken out. But they wanted to see Kareem Hunt run with the first team offense, and he ran pretty well. So that certainly doesn't help Spencer Ware. Like I mentioned, non PPR, probably going to take Kareem Hunt first. And then in PPR, I'm going to take Ware. I was in a draft over the weekend, like I mentioned earlier, where it was a PPR and Kareem Hunt went in the 7th, and then we got Spencer Ware in the 8th. So
Wow.
do with that what you will. I think this is one of the hardest situations to figure out this year heading into the season.
Yeah, and it's, Andy Reid running backs are one of the most valuable commodities in fantasy football. Obviously, when you have that guy, he can be awesome. And, we saw it last year, even when it was, he was messing around with Charles and then Sharkhandrick West and then Spencer Ware and kind of rotating them around. There was a lot, whoever played had a chance to have a really good game. I like Kareem Hunt a lot. I think he's got a lot of talent. I think has the skills to be a 3-down back, obviously can be that pass catcher. I think I'm with you in terms of initially it's probably more of a committee. I think I lean I go back and forth, but I think I lean Hunt in both PPR and standard. He showed a lot of passing ability at Akron. I think he can be a pass catcher as well. But it's just when you're looking at where Spencer Ware is coming off the board, kind of, on ADP in the 4th round, 5th round. Like there's other running backs there, like C.J. Anderson's there. Obviously, I'm taking him. Bilal Powell maybe in PPR. Doug Martin's interesting. Mark Ingram in the top of the 6th. I know Damien doesn't like that one, but I will take Mark. I will take Mark Ingram. Damien, what about you? Spencer Ware, Kareem Hunt. Are you drafting either of these guys?
It's it's funny that Frank brought up Spencer Ware as the PPR guy, just because this was somebody that never caught the ball in college, and at the beginning of last year, everyone was, well, who even if Spencer Ware takes over, he can be the goal line guy, but who's going to catch the passes? And then the guy comes out, and I mean, he looked unbelievable as a receiver. And I think it's just, again, one of those cases where he always had the skills to do it. Nobody just ever gave him an opportunity to. So I actually agree with him in that I think that Ware's going to have a role. But if we're talking about this backfield as a whole, I think I'm going to avoid it. Because you still have to pay. I don't want to say a premium, but you still have to commit a pretty valuable pick to really either of these guys. And I just don't trust myself to really be able to make the right decision on a week-to-week basis with these guys. I don't think it's a change that's going to happen even if Hunt takes over. I think that's going to be a gradual shift where it might be week 7, week 8 before he's actually getting the majority of the touches. And even if it is the majority, it may be 13 carries and Ware gets 11. You mentioned Sharkhandrick West. The preseason game against the Bengals here, the guy had like 120 yards. I mean, he broke off 3 30-yard runs, I think. So. Not that he's, they're necessarily looking for him to kind of be that guy, but I just think there's going to be a lot of options here. And it's not going to be an obvious guy that you're going to feel great starting every week. So unless you're getting him at a pretty big discount, it's probably better to just take somebody else with that pick.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at ADP right now. Like, obviously, if you're looking for someone that you could start early, guys like Frank Gore, Terrence West, Rob Kelly make a lot more sense. But, if you want to take an upside shot, you can be a little more patient. Kareem Hunt is definitely a guy that interests me and a guy that I'd be fine taking in the 8th, 9th round, depending on how my team is shaking up. Let's talk about Travis Kelce. obviously, Gronk has shown when he's healthy, he can be the most dominant tight end. But, Kelsey was the tight end one last year. Obviously, in PPR leagues, he gets a nice boost. He gets a lot of work. He'll probably be the most targeted receiver in this passing game. But those touchdowns are few and far between. Frank, where does Kelsey rank for you among tight ends? And, do you expect, the touchdowns and, the red zone looks to kind of increase in this offense and as he becomes more important to what they do?
Yeah, I have Kelsey ranked as my second tight end in both standard and PPR. And originally, like 2 months ago, I had him ranked over Gronk just based on all the injury concerns with Gronk every single year, kind of getting banged up. It looked like Kelsey was on the rise, kind of entering the prime of his career. But I'm still going to take Gronk over him if I spend a third round pick on a tight end. Typically, I just can't do it. In any mock draft or draft that I've ever done, if I use a top 3 round pick on a tight end, I pretty much just hate the way that the rest of my team turns out.
Yep.
I get if you want to do it. I think he's a pretty safe pick at the end of the third round. If you get him early fourth, I think that's an absolute steal because I agree with you. He's going to be the top target in this offense. Doesn't have to battle with Jeremy Maclin for targets anymore. Tyreek Hill is still going to do his thing, but I don't think he's a prototypical wide receiver one for this offense. So I think Kelsey's a lock for 80 to 90 receptions. Could probably replicate what he did last year, maybe even build off of it a little bit. But the touchdowns just have never been there for his career. I mean, just 1 year ago, you would think with 85 receptions and over 1,100 yards that he would have more than 4 touchdowns, but he's never had more than 5 in each of the past 3 seasons. So I don't know how we can project that moving forward. I know touchdowns are kind of fluky, and from 1 year to the next, I mean, he can easily come out this year and have 8 touchdowns, and nobody would have seen it coming. But I just think based on what we've seen, the way that they use him, and the fact that other teams know that he's probably going to be their number 1 target this season, if they want to try and double team him in the red zone, that's probably going to hurt him even more. So I think what he did last year is pretty close to what I would project for him this season. Could probably add a couple more receptions and yards, but I wouldn't add much more than 1 or 2 touchdowns. I think 6 is kind of just like the cap for him, which probably isn't fair to say, but just based on the way we've seen him used in the past.
Yeah, no, I'm 100% with you there, and I think that's kind of, you were mentioning taking tight end early, and that's why, like, every time I do it, I hate my team. I don't like the way direction. I feel like I'm constantly chasing. The one thing that I will say about Kelsey is last year, yes, he was the tight end 1, but if you put his stats against the year before, he would have been like tight end 6. So it was just kind of a bad year for tight ends all around. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of potential. I think he has 90 catch potential. I think he has over 1,000 yards potential. But those touchdowns are going to be critical. And if you're taking him in the 3rd, 4th round, you're going to need him to be a lot closer to 6 or more than that 4 or 5 that he's been kind of the past few years. Damian, what about you? Where are you at with Kelsey, and are you comfortable taking him at the end of the 3rd, beginning of the 4th?
I love Kelsey. I mean, Cincinnati's my college team, which doesn't make much sense, but they are. So I've been kind of following him, for a few years now, and for the longest time, I mean, it just seemed like nobody hated this guy more than Andy Reid. It didn't make any sense, and finally now he's getting the volume. I think he's, in terms of just pure volume, I think he might actually be the safest tight end on the board, even above Gronk, just when you factor in the injury history and the other weapons the Patriots are going to have. It's just that Gronk can give you a 16 touchdown season, and Kelsey's probably, even if he's not capped at 6, he's definitely not giving you a 12 touchdown season, probably, just the way that offense operates. But if we're talking about the fishbowl, pre-show here, but if you're any type of tight end premium format, which seems to be a little bit more common than even I had thought, just aside from the fishbowl, there's some other industry leagues that kind of give tight ends a little bit of boost. If you're in one of those leagues, then I'd move him up above Gronk, because I think the safety of him playing and the fact that even if he doesn't get the touchdowns, if you're getting a little bit of a boost on every single one of his catches and every single one of his yards, he's going to be the tight end 1. And in that situation, he's probably going. I mean, in the fishbowl, he was going, like, I saw him go at the end of the 1st round in a couple. Usually he was gone by the mid-2nd. So If you can in a standard PPR late in the third, I think is fair. But like you guys said, I just think it messes up your team so much. It's almost like taking Rodgers or Brady. You kind of love that pick when you're looking at some of the other players, but then as soon as 15 picks go by and you realize that your next pick in the round after is somebody that you feel like you're reaching 2 rounds for, it just kind of ruins the whole draft for you. So I might not do it myself, but I think in terms of pure production, he's certainly worth a third-round pick.
Yeah, and I'm 100% with you. It makes sense. It's so hard to do it, and that's why like mock drafts are critical. If you think you like Kelsey a lot and you'd be comfortable taking him there, do a mock draft. Do a couple mock drafts. See how your team goes. Do some best ball drafts over at draft and kind of see how your team goes and see if you feel like you're chasing, because then you can head into your home leagues, head into your big money leagues, and have a good plan for how you want to attack it. And maybe you're comfortable with a lot of those guys that go there, and you're fine building your team after taking a Gronk in round 2 or a Kelsey in round 3. It's just not something I'm going to do. Let's talk about Tyreek Hill and some of the other pass catchers. Tyreek Hill obviously was one of those guys that kind of started off slow. Then he became a guy that you wanted to had that big play ability, but wasn't a guy you could really rely on. To becoming a guy that I think is gonna get targets, gonna get a lot of looks, especially with Alex Smith as his quarterback. He developed a lot. If you look at his 10-game stretch, and you kind of parlay that over 16 games, it's 100 catches, it's over 1,000 yards. The touchdowns will probably fluctuate with him, but he's definitely a guy I like, and he's going in the 4th round. Like I would be comfortable taking him in that 4th, 5th round range all day long. He's probably gonna be my wide receiver 2 or 3 at that point, just because that's how I draft. But he's definitely a guy I'm interested in. Damien, what about you?
No chance. I'm so out on Tyreek Hill. And it's weird because last year, I was throwing him in my DraftKings lineup every week. I picked him up. It was great. But I heard I don't know if it was one of the RotoWire stuff, but I heard somebody say it could be Antonio Brown, and I almost fainted.
It's in the realm of possibilities. It's not. It's not
in the realm of possibility. It's like the furthest thing away from the realm of possibility. Antonio Brown has caught 484 passes over the last 4 years. And people want to say, oh, this guy came out of nowhere. His first 2 years with the Steelers, he didn't do anything. Yeah, but in college, he was catching 100 passes a year. In 3 years at Central, he caught 305 passes. You know how many passes Tyreek Hill caught in his 1 year at Oklahoma State? 31. He had more carries than he had catches. He was a running back, which is great, but you're not taking a running back and making him a top 5 receiver in the NFL. I don't know. It seemed like last year I didn't really see him do much aside from run streak routes and curls, a few screens here or there. Now they're saying he's a bona fide number 1 receiver. And I just don't think you want that for your football team. The guy's 5'9", 5'10". It's just he's not somebody you can throw the ball up to and be like, go get it. You have to manufacture touches for him. It's Percy Harvin all over again, which is great if you have the offense around it, but it's not great if you essentially have no other proven players aside from, I guess, Travis Kelce maybe. So I think defenses are going to key on this guy. He's going to catch, I guess, maybe in a PPR where they're just throwing him a lot of stuff at the line of scrimmage and hoping he breaks one. But it's almost a case with him where they're saying, oh, now he's our number 1 wide receiver. We're going to take him off special teams. He's probably better at punt and kick returns than he is at anything else. Why would you want to take him off those units? That's just a factor of you not having other receivers.
Because he's number 1 receiver. He's your number 2 option in your passing offense.
But he's your number 1 receiver because you cut Jeremy Maclin for no reason and didn't feel like signing anybody else. He's not your number 1 receiver because he's shown anything in his career to this point.
He is.
You think that he should be.
Yeah, 13 targets against Carolina, 10 targets against Denver. He was 6 for 66, 9 for 52. Obviously,
what did he average? 9.1 yards per catch.
9.7, but he had.
9.9.
Yeah,
when was
but
the last time you saw number 1 wide receiver average less than 10 yards a catch?
Yeah, but he also had averaged 19.6 yards against the Colts on 5 catches. He averaged 9 yards on 10 catches. He averaged 13 yards on 4 catches. I think you're underselling him a little bit. And you know what, Damien? Tyreek Hill is 5'10", 185. Antonio Brown is 5'10", 181. I don't know that they're in terms of.
But that's my point. Like, you're just saying I can find you a guy on the street that's 5'10", 181. Doesn't mean he's Antonio Brown.
No,
Like,
but
he just
this
profile.
guy has shown ability as a route runner. He's shown ability as a pass catcher. He can make big plays. I'm not saying he's Antonio Brown. I'm not saying go draft him super high, but for a guy you can get in the 4th and 5th round that I think can go over 1,000 yards, get you like 6 touchdowns, I think he's a guy that I know I would be very fine drafting where he's currently going. Frank, what about you? Break the tie.
Oh man, I don't want to do this kind of like a cop out, but I'm in the middle of both of you guys. I agree he's not, your prototypical wide receiver one. He doesn't have that huge size, but he has electric speed, and you can't teach that. But seriously, we saw him make a ton of amazing plays last year. Honestly, if they could just get the ball in his hands out in space, he'll be able to make a lot of people miss after the catch. He'll be able to make a lot of things happen, and I think there will be a fair number of targets for him this year. I don't know how much we can realistically project because, like we mentioned, Travis Kelce is probably the presumed number one target in this offense, in an offense where, Alex Smith doesn't typically throw to his wide receivers a lot. I know just 2 years ago, Jeremy Maclin finished as a top 20 wide receiver in both standard and PPR, but the years before that, we were talking about how abysmal all Chiefs wide receivers are and how we don't want anything to do with them in fantasy. So I'm kind of on the fence here. I mean, I'm probably not going to end up with him on any of my teams. I have him ranked as my wide receiver 26. I agree. I'd much rather like him as my wide receiver 3 than my wide receiver 2. If you could get him in that late 4th, early 5th, in that range. Typically, what I like to do is I like to pair upside with some safety. So, a guy we were talking about earlier, if I took a Demaryius Thomas or if I have a Larry Fitzgerald on my team, kind of a safe option, maybe I'll be more inclined to take a shot on the upside of a Tyreek Hill in that range. But typically, I'm probably just not going to own him on many teams. It's not a knock against him. I think he is a very talented player. He's electric, like I mentioned, but I just don't know that there's going to be enough targets for him to pay off where you have to take him right now. I mean, he scored touchdowns at a ridiculous rate last year, and we continuously say this, not on just this show, any show. I mean, it's impossible to project touchdowns. So I'm on the fence. I'm probably not going to have him on a lot of teams. I did want to say that I come in at about 5'9", 175. So, I mean, if someone wants to consider me,
yeah, so you're basically Antonio Brown.
I'd be willing to take it. Yeah.
It's that carb diet. There you go. Nothing but carbs. Hey, you know who the real comp for Tyreek Hill is though? Dante Hall, X Factor.
Get out of here!
Hall.
Get out of here!
There's your comp for Tyreek Hill.
This isn't Devin Hester. Here, Damian, we'll make a little bet on the show.
It's Dante Hall. Watch some Dante Hall highlights.
Okay, how
electric.
He was electric as a returner. He was Devin Hester. This is more than that. Here's what I'll say. Tyreek Hill will be a top 20 wide receiver this year.
What's his ADP, like wide receiver 21?
Well, you're make it sound like he's just not gonna be.
No. I'm saying like not as a counter to that point, but just in general. I haven't looked at his ADP in a little bit, but I feel like it's early 20s, right?
Fantasy Pros has him at wide receiver 20.
Yeah.
20 exactly. Yeah, I mean I'm saying he's not.
In PPR, let's see, he's 18. So what do you want to do? You want to do like see, but then like I don't know.
All right, so well then if he's going wide receiver 20, you got to take him as a top 15, and I'll take him as at 25 or less.
Okay, and then if it's in the middle, we push.
Yeah.
Done deal. Frank, J.U. Chesson, Chris Conley. Albert Wilson, are you in on any of these kind of guys?
Nope, not even in a best ball format. I don't think there's much upside there. Just based on Alex Smith and this offense, we know Andy Reid is going to run the ball a lot. Kareem Hunt, Spencer Ware, they're going to do their thing. Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, the two names we were just talking about, they're going to be the top 2 options in this offense. And I can't even really tell you the last time the Chiefs had 3 fantasy relevant options in receiving options in one season. So I don't really have anything to do with any one of these guys. I've heard a few guys on our fantasy sports radio network bring up the name Demarcus Robinson a bit.
Yep.
Maybe that's a guy you put on your scout team. I've heard he has some upside. I really don't know much about the guy, to be honest. Chris Conley, Albert Wilson, they haven't done much at the NFL level, and maybe they could if they were in the right situation. But it's just Alex Smith and this offense, the way that everything is run. I just don't think that a third receiver can be fantasy viable. Now, if Patrick Mahomes ends up being the quarterback, I don't want to jump on the hype train here, but I mean, he's looked tremendous in the preseason so far. And something that I've noticed with him is that even when he scrambles outside the pocket, and he's very athletic, he can do that on nearly every play if he has to. His eyes are always down the field. So, he's not like Alex Smith, where Alex Smith, if he gets in trouble, he's going to try to just dump it off, or he's going to take the easy route out. He's just going to throw the ball out of bounds. Patrick Mahomes isn't like that. So if he ends up having to be the quarterback at some point because of an injury to Alex Smith, then maybe we see, one of these guys emerge where they can have another, receiver-friendly fantasy option here. But until that happens, I just can't see anybody in this offense taking that next step.
Yeah, I think there's a very reasonable possibility that Alex Smith gets Kaepernicked again and Pat Mahomes becomes the center or becomes the quarterback, assuming the team's just not heading in the right direction. Obviously, they were a playoff team last year. If they kind of are doing that again and ball control and run the ball and really good defense, then yeah, he probably plays the whole season. But I think it's in the realm of possibilities, and I think Demarcus Robinson, I think Chris Conley would be two guys that would benefit greatly. So, in dynasty leagues, I like both those guys as guys you can stash on your bench. And, if Mahomes ends up getting the starting gig next year because they can cut Alex Smith and basically save $18 million, those guys can, be trending in the right direction. Let's finish up the division with the Oakland Raiders. Obviously, a lot to like here. Marshawn Lynch came out of retirement. People are getting a little crazy. I mean, he was all the way up into the second round in ADP. It's starting to calm down a little bit, closer to the fourth. Damian, is Marshawn Lynch a guy that you are interested in this season?
No. Between the fact that he just took an entire year off of football, and that he really didn't look all that great his last year in Seattle, I find it hard to see him come back and basically give us, Marshawn Lynch from 2-3 years ago. So I think I'm a little bit lower on the Raiders as a whole than a lot of people, because I'm not going to be totally in on Carr either. But I don't think Lynch is going to be a factor in the passing game at all. I don't think he's a guy that's going to, all of a sudden get 14 rushing touchdowns. Yeah. And I like both Richard and DeAndre Washington. So I don't think this is, I know it's almost, I don't want to say it's kind of like a novelty, because Lynch is a player that's had a terrific NFL career, and it's cool to see him kind of go back to Oakland, where he's from, and kind of finish it off there. But it almost seems like part of this is kind of like a big PR thing, as opposed to them trying to find a running back that they're going to, be giving 25 touches to week in, week out.
I think that's the smartest thing you've said on the history of the show. I'm 100%.
You're forgetting the Tyreek Hill thing.
And yeah, the ceiling is MVP as well, or the floor is MVP. That's the other one. I'm 100% with you on Lynch. I think he's getting totally overdrafted. This is a guy that we haven't seen play a full season in 2 years. Played 7 games last time. Looked pretty terrible. Looked pretty washed. Obviously, Latavius Murray is pretty terrible and pretty washed, and had 12 touchdowns. So is it within the realm of possibilities? Sure. I'm just not buying it, and I'm 100% with you. I like DeAndre Washington. I like Jalen Richard. I think both have value as a guy you can get real late, and when Lynch falters, is what I expect. One of those guys could easily step in and be a guy you use kind of as a flex option, RB2, depending on the matchups and all that good stuff. Frank, what about you? Are you in on Marshawn?
No, I am not in on him either, and there are plenty of reasons why. I actually have a fun little stat that the Raiders were one of only 2 teams last year that had 3 different running backs with at least 80 or more rushing attempts. The only other team was the Detroit Lions, and really, honestly, they went with a committee approach last year. I know Latavius Murray got the goal line touches, but DeAndre Washington, Jalen Richard, they also had a role in this offense. We've already heard murmurs about Marshawn Lynch being held under 200 carries this year. And I know that's where Latavius Murray was at last year. He was in that 195 to 200 range. So he can still have some value based on those touchdowns. Don't get me wrong. The Raiders are going to be a good offense. They're going to get down the field. They have an absolutely great offensive line. Uh, in a non-PPR, I can see using a third-round pick on him because he is going to score a lot of touchdowns this season. I won't feel great doing it, but I am on record saying that in non-PPR and standard leagues, I really do want to target workhorse running backs, guys that are going to score a lot of touchdowns. I want to come out of the first 3 rounds of those drafts with, honestly, 2 running backs on my team already, more often than not. In PPR leagues, I'm not targeting him in the 4th round. I'd rather take a shot on any of the rookies. Rather take a shot on Isaiah Crowell, who I am very high on this year as well. Uh, I just think, the age, the combination of the injury concerns the past couple of years, and the fact that the Raiders are a team that wants to go far this season. I mean, they're looking for the long haul. They want to go into the playoffs and beyond. Why are they going to give Marshawn Lynch 20 plus carries at any point this season? I think they're a pretty safe bet to make the playoffs, whether it's a wild card team or competing in that division. But honestly, they're going to need Marshawn Lynch down the stretch and for those games in the playoffs. It makes absolutely no sense for them to use him that much throughout the regular season. He's not going to be one of these typical 20 plus running back touches kind of guys. So
Yeah.
third round, I could see doing it in non PPR just because he's going to score a lot of touchdowns. But in PPR, I'm really kind of just avoiding this situation completely.
So Frank, is it Jalen Richard or is it DeAndre Washington for you?
Yeah, I've heard people go back and forth. I think I lean Richard by a little bit. I think I was a little more impressed with what I saw out of him last year. DeAndre Washington looked fine as well. I think Richard gives them a little bit more versatility. I think he's a better pass catcher out of the backfield. But honestly, I have them both ranked back to back in, I want to say, the 50 range of running back, around there. I think these are 2 handcuffs. You could take a shot on either one of them here because, if Marshawn Lynch gets hurt again, or if, they're not using him as much, like we just mentioned, then, one of these guys is probably going to have some kind of standalone value, whether it's a flex or a bye week replacement, whatever it is. If I had to choose one of them, I do lean Jalen Richard, though.
Yep, 100% with you. I like Richard. I think he had a little more effort in the passing game. Obviously had more targets, and he has that big playability. Damien, what about you? DeAndre Washington or Jalen Richard?
It's a coin flip. I think if I had to choose them with you guys, I'd take Richard, but I'm fine with either. It really, especially in like a MFL or a best ball league where once one goes, if I'm up fairly close, I don't mind taking the other one.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to do it. Let's talk about Derek Carr. 7th round, QB6. Like what are we doing here? What's going on, Damien?
I couldn't tell you if I tried. I think the whole thing with the Raiders are just, with the Lynch thing, with the Vegas thing, with kind of how high they were last year before Carr got hurt. He's kind of the sexy pick at quarterback, if you will. I think people are projecting this big growth for this offense. And I mean, I guess it can happen. I don't think that they have enough depth. When you look at, if you look at like the Tom Brady 50 touchdown season or the Peyton Manning, with the Broncos that year, it's either you have, a generational talent like Randy Moss or something, or you have, 5, 6 options between your tight end and pass catching running backs. It's tough to basically have what we mentioned with that narrow tree with the Broncos, or with the Jets the past couple seasons. That's kind of what the Raiders have, with just, Cooper and Crabtree, and they're both really strong receivers. But I just think with just the 2 of them, I don't think the ceiling for Carr is as high as people are projecting it to be, especially if you're buying into Lynch. And if you're not buying into Lynch, but you're buying into, Richard and Washington, then unless you think those guys are going to do the majority of their work, on dump offs and passes, you can't. I mean, unless you think they're going to score 45 points a game. I guess if you think the Raiders are going to score 45 points a game, then it can happen. But otherwise, it's kind of the numbers just don't add up here.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. Like, I'm taking Cousins, Luck, Winston, Mariota, Cam, Roethlisberger, Matthew Stafford, Andy Dalton. Like, give me all those guys over Derek Carr. I don't get it. Frank, are you comfortable taking him in the 7th round?
Absolutely not. Break out the brooms. It's a clean sweep here. I won't have Derek Carr on any of my teams this year. And it's not a knock on him. I just think based on the way this offense ran last year, and I think how we project this offense to run this year, is Marshawn Lynch is probably going to be in there scoring a lot of touchdowns. Those running backs are still going to be involved. He has two great options on the outside in Amari Cooper and Michael Crabtree, and I think he'll do just enough for both of those guys to be fantasy relevant. We've seen that the past 2 seasons as well. But I agree with you. Very similar to the Phillip Rivers take from early on. It's just the quarterbacks that he's going around. I'm 10 out of 10 times going to take those guys before I reach on a Derek Carr like other people are. I'm going to take Matt Stafford over him. I'm going to take Jameis Winston, Kirk Cousins, Marcus Mariota, even Russell Wilson, who I'm not especially high on, but I'll still take him over Derek Carr. I'll take Ben Roethlisberger over Derek Carr, which some people might find crazy, but the upside of a Ben Roethlisberger, Antonio Brown in that offense, Le'Veon Bell catching the ball out of the backfield, Martavis Bryant. A lot of people are going to say, oh, well, if you take Ben Roethlisberger, you're going to have to stream a quarterback on road games. No. Don't worry about that. The fact that he has Martavis Bryant back this year, I mean, hopefully he doesn't get caught doing anything suspicious off the field again. But if he's going to be there, Ben Roethlisberger is going to be better on the road. I don't care what anyone says. It's not something that's, within his psyche that he just can't play on the road. I think it's the fact that he'll have all of these weapons together, and whether he's home, the road, playing in outer space, I don't care where it is. If you have all of those weapons together, you're going to be a productive quarterback. And we're projecting all of those receivers, or at least I am, to have big years. And if that's the case, that's going to be with Ben Roethlisberger throwing them the ball. So I'll even take a big Ben over Derek Carr. I'm not going to own Derek Carr where he's going in any of my drafts this year.
Yeah, 100% with you. Let's talk about those two pass catchers, Amari Cooper, Michael Crabtree, both elite fantasy options. Damian, if you're drafting, which one's more appealing to you?
I guess it's Cooper. I haven't really found myself drafting him very often outside of, I think, the fishbowl is the only share I have right now, just because I've gotten frustrated with constantly waiting for him to take that next step. And I don't really know. I mean, it seems like it's not like it's something's missing with him. You watch him play, and the guy's the complete package, but he just doesn't get the red zone targets. I mean, I know Crabtree gets a lot, but they're throwing to like Seth Roberts.
Yes, they are. They're throwing a lot more to Seth Roberts.
I don't really know if that's going to change.
Nope.
I think it actually might have been Matt Harmon who brought this up, that Cooper's just contested catch percentage isn't very good. And maybe that's why he's not targeted as much in kind of the red zone. I mean, I don't know if we give the Raiders that much credit for digging that deep into kind of analytics there, or if it's just kind of a feel thing that Carr has with Crabtree. But I'd still take Cooper just because I think the ceiling is higher in terms of, I mean, you look at his age and you look at just his physical skills. I don't think, I mean, it might not happen here this year, but, if you were in a different offense or something, I think he has the skills to, give you a 1,500-yard season with double-digit touchdowns, where I don't think Crabtree is going to do that. But in a standard league, Crabtree's one of those guys. It's a little bit like Eric Decker has been the past few years, where you don't love drafting him, you don't love starting him, but he never gives you 2 for 27. He's always giving you 50, 60 yards, and when he gets in the end zone, it's 10, 15 points. So I just think he's a great guy to pair with the higher volatility wide receivers, the boomer bust guys, like Martavius Bryant,
yep. Or Tyreek
like
Hill,
Sean Jackson, something like that. Or no, not Tyreek Hill, but you got me rolling there. Try to sneak it in.
Yeah, by the goalie. Give me Michael Crabtree all day long. Give me those red zone targets. Give me, I don't know. I just don't get taking the worst fantasy receiver 2 rounds before Michael Crabtree. I understand, Mike, that Amari Cooper has a ton of talent, and I think he's a really, really good football player. And I just, in terms of what we need for fantasy, in terms of the yards, in terms of those all-important touchdowns, give me Michael Crabtree all day long. Like, he was like top 5 in red zone attempts or red zone targets last year. I think he was three times as many the year before. Like, can Cooper break out in year 3? Of course. That's a lot of times when the receivers tend to break out. It's right then. I think we have another year or two of Crabtree being the guy, And if the fact that I can get him 2 rounds later, like I took him in the 3rd round out of my home league 12-team draft on Saturday, and I loved it. I think he's going to be great. I think he's going to be 1,000+ yards. I think he's going to be close to double-digit touchdowns. And I give me him all day long. Frank, what about you?
Yeah, based on the average draft position, I'll take Crabtree in the 4th over Cooper in the 2nd. I like what Damian said about Cooper is that he definitely has the upside to be, one of these upper echelon wide receivers in the NFL. It's just we haven't seen him do it yet. So currently we're drafting him for his ceiling, for his absolute ceiling, or maybe he can exceed where we're drafting him right now. But the fact is we haven't seen it yet. I mean, just last year, Michael Crabtree had more targets than Amari Cooper. He had more receptions, and he had 3 more touchdowns. Didn't have as many yards, but I mean, give me the guy with more receptions, more targets, and more touchdowns, and he's going 2 rounds later. That's something that I do commend with Derek Carr in this offense, and that's why we see Michael Crabtree get as many red zone targets as he is because Derek Carr isn't going to force feed just one wide receiver. Just because Amari Cooper is the quote-unquote wide receiver 1 in this offense, and they used a very high draft pick on him, Derek Carr is not just going to force feed him the ball, especially in the red zone. If he's getting double teamed, triple teamed, that's why Michael Crabtree is getting as many red zone targets as he is, because on most of those plays, he's getting single coverage on the outside. Once they get in the red zone, once they get towards the end zone there. So that's why he gets those touchdowns, those targets, and I don't think that's just all of a sudden going to go away. With that being said, I had an Oakland Raiders beat writer on a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying how Amari Cooper is jacked up this year, that he was working out really hard in the offseason, trying to put on weight because he wants to become more of a force in the red zone. He wants to score more touchdowns this year. I mean, if we get a 1,200 yard season out of him with 8 to 10 touchdowns, he's going to pay off that 2nd-round draft value.
Yep.
The problem is I still think that teams are going to try and zone in and really take away Cooper as the top receiving threat on this team. And with that, there will still be a lot of targets to go around for Michael Crabtree. So based on the average draft position, I will take Crabtree in the 4th every single time over Amari Cooper in the 2nd round. I have no problem with you taking Crabtree, especially if it was at the end of the 3rd round. I have no problem with that either, especially in the standard.
Yeah, I had the first pick, so 12, 24, 36. So I was loving it.
Yep.
We did see on Saturday Amari Cooper go up and make that catch with around 3 guys, and I think to your point, that he has that elite Julio Jones type potential, but a guy you're drafting in the 2nd round, it feels like you're kind of drafting him at his potential ceiling, and I hate doing that. The tight ends, Jared Cook, Clive Walford, are we interested in any of them? Tight end is so deep this year. Personally, I can't get behind him. Frank, what about you?
No, I'm not doing the Jared Cook thing, and I guarantee you at some point this year, some wise guy is going to write a waiver wire article where Jared Cook is going to be like one of the top pickups because he's going to be coming off a 2-touchdown game, and we're all going to get sucked into the Jared Cook. No, I'm not doing that again. He hasn't been relevant for years. I don't know that he's ever been relevant. I feel like Jared Cook has always been upside. He has the tools to be a great tight end, but he's just never put it together. I know that they were talking to Clive Walford last year after they drafted him, but I just don't know that there's enough targets to go around for any tight end to be, even fantasy relevant where you have to start 2 of them. So I'm probably just not going to take either one of these guys. In a dynasty, you want to take a shot on the younger Clive Walford, you could. I'm probably just not going to take either one of these guys this season. And don't pick up Jared Cook. Don't fall for it.
Yeah, don't fall for Jared Cook. He is terrible. He took Aaron Rodgers basically force-feeding him targets for him to be good. I do like Clive Walford as a player. I think he has a lot of potential. This offense is going to have to obviously take a shift. It feels very, Seattle Seahawks to me, where they're going to be run-focused, and then now that they're paying Derek Carr, it's going to start shifting, and they obviously have the weapons to throw, but until that actually happens, I'm with you. You can't really target any of these guys. All right, Frank, this was a lot of fun. I really appreciate you taking time to join us. Tell everyone where they could follow you on Twitter, check out all your work, check out the FNTSY Sports Network, all that stuff.
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter at roto_Frank. I wish I had a more creative Twitter handle. I don't know. If you guys have some better ideas, feel free to let me know. I'm on every day the Fantasy Sports Radio Network. You can download the app. Go to fntsy.com/radio. You can listen on your computer every weekday, 11 a.m. to noon Eastern Standard Time. So that would be 8 a.m. on the West Coast. You can check that out. If you subscribe to the Fantasy Sports Network YouTube channel, that very radio show that I was just talking about, Fantasy Football Best Friends Forever, we also simulcast that as a live stream on YouTube. So you can check that out. You can see my beautiful mug every single day. So.
All right, Frank. Yeah, we really appreciate you taking the time to join us. Make sure you join us on Monday, as the great Evan Silva will be joining us to talk all kinds of great fantasy football stuff. Once again, check out our sponsor Draft. Go to playdraft.com/fakepigskin or download the app. Enter promo code fakepigskin. Get an extra $3 ticket for a best ball draft. Get a free premium year of Fake Pigskin Elite. For my host, Damian Dabrowski, I'm Kyle Robert, and we'll talk to you guys next time.